AWS Identity and Access Management IAM. Description: AWS Identity and Access Management IAM is a web service that helps you securely control access to AWS resources. With IAM, you can create and manage users, groups, and roles, and assign them permissions to specific resources. This allows you to control who has access to what, and how they can interact with your AWS environment. Prerequisites: AWS account. An active AWS account is required to use IAM. IAM users are individual accounts that can be granted access to AWS resources. Use cases: control access to AWS resources. IAM allows you to control which users and groups have access to specific AWS resources, such as S3 buckets, EC2 instances, and Lambda functions. Grant permissions to specific users. IAM lets you define specific permissions for different users, allowing you to tailor access based on their roles and responsibilities. Secure AWS environment by controlling access to AWS resources. IAM helps you protect your environment from unauthorized access and data breaches. Steps: create IAM users. Create IAM users to represent individuals who need access to AWS resources. Assign IAM policies. Define IAM policies that specify the permissions allowed for different users or groups. Attach policies to users. Attach the created IAM policies to specific users or groups to grant them access to the defined resources. Challenges and fixes: permission escalation. Use least privilege principle. Grant users only the minimum permissions necessary to perform their job duties. This helps prevent accidental or malicious access to sensitive data. Fix: implement a least privilege principle strategy. Regularly audit and review user permissions to ensure they have only the necessary access. Security breaches: rotate credentials regularly. Regularly rotate user credentials to reduce the risk of unauthorized access. Fix: establish a strong password policy that requires frequent password rotations and encourages the use of complex passwords. Implement multi-factor authentication (MFA) for added security. Use multi-factor authentication. Enable multi-factor authentication (MFA) to require users to provide an additional layer of authentication before accessing their account. Fix: enable multi-factor authentication (MFA) for all users and root accounts. Configuration errors: use IAM policies for fine-grained control. Use IAM policies to define specific permissions for different users and groups, allowing for fine-grained access control. Fix: implement comprehensive IAM policies with clearly defined permissions for different users, groups, and roles. Complex permission management: use IAM roles for temporary access. Use IAM roles to grant temporary access to AWS resources based on specific tasks or projects. Fix: utilize temporary security credentials through IAM roles for short-term access, avoiding the need for long-term user credentials. Use AWS organizations for centralized IAM management. Use AWS organizations to manage IAM policies and permissions across multiple AWS accounts. Fix: leverage AWS organizations for centralized IAM management, providing a consistent approach to permission control across multiple accounts. Compliance requirements: use IAM policies to meet compliance requirements. Use IAM policies to meet specific compliance requirements, such as HIPAA or PCI DSS. Fix: design and implement IAM policies that align with your organization's compliance requirements. Use CloudTrail to audit IAM activity. Use CloudTrail to track and audit all IAM activity, providing a record of who accessed what resources and when. Fix: enable CloudTrail logging for IAM activities, allowing you to audit and monitor all actions related to ING. Cost optimization. Use ING roles for temporary access. Use ING roles to grant temporary access to AWS resources, reducing the number of active user accounts and associated costs. Fix employ ING roles to grant temporary access to AWS resources, minimizing the number of active user accounts and associated costs. Use least privilege principle. Grant users only the minimum permissions necessary to perform their job duties, reducing the risk of unnecessary resource usage and associated costs. Fix implement a least privilege principle strategy, ensuring users have only the minimum permissions required for their tasks, minimizing resource consumption and associated costs.